There are things that destroy a man not from the outside, but from within. Not crises, not competitors, not a lack of opportunities, but slow, almost imperceptible processes of inner decay that look harmless for a long time. They disguise themselves as fatigue, as caution, as common sense, as a normal desire to live peacefully. But it is exactly these things that, year after year, strip a person of will, depth, and scale. The most dangerous thing about them is that they rarely arrive as an obvious collapse. Much more often, they look like normal life. A person works, socializes, makes plans, reads things, dreams about something. But inside, a retreat is already underway. Not loud, not dramatic, quiet. And if he does not stop in time, one day he will discover that outwardly he still exists, but inwardly he has long since stopped living at full strength. Miyamoto Musashi, if you strip away the romance of legends and leave only the nerve of his philosophy, understood this with absolute clarity. He saw that a man's main enemy is not the external world, but inner lack of control. Not those people, not difficult circumstances, not other people's malice, but his own weaknesses, which a person once allows to become the norm. And in this, his thought intersects in a remarkable way with Carl Jung. Because Jung also said that a person rarely becomes a victim of fate in the direct sense. Much more often, he becomes a victim of what remains unconscious within him, of what was never seen, named, and brought under the command of a mature will. Jung has the image of the shadow, that part of the psyche a person does not want to admit is their own. Usually when people hear this word, they imagine aggression, envy, shameful impulses. But the shadow is not only the dark in a primitive sense. Unaccepted strength also lies there. The toughness you once called rudeness lies there. Ambition, which you confused with vanity. Courage, which you took for danger. The ability to stand apart, which seemed like coldness to you. And until a man encounters this part of himself, he lives a reduced life. He is convenient, but not strong. He is understandable, but not deep. He is careful, but not whole. That is why today it is worth talking not just about habits, but about 3 deadly weaknesses that slowly destroy a man from within. The first is dependence on approval. The second is running from discomfort. The third is slavery to his own desires. Each of them seems ordinary. Each of them is even encouraged in the modern world. But together, they turn a potentially strong man into someone who lives by another person's will, another person's expectations, and another person's standards of comfort. Let us begin with the first weakness: dependence on approval. On the surface, it looks almost harmless. A person wants respect, recognition, a good reputation. There is nothing wrong with that, until other people's approval becomes the hidden currency that supports his entire self-worth. From that moment on, he is no longer free. He stops living from his own center and begins constantly adjusting his behavior to the gaze of others. He becomes like a company whose entire liquidity depends on outside credit. As long as the credit line is open, everything seems stable. But the moment external validation disappears, panic begins inside. For a man, this is especially destructive because he may go for years without noticing how deeply he is controlled by the need to be recognized. He chooses not what he believes is right, but what looks favorable. He says not what he thinks, but what is safe. He bets not on inner truth, but on external effect. And one day he finds that his life is beautifully packaged, but inside it is going hollow. Jung would have called this captivity to the persona, the social mask. When a person becomes so fused with the image of a worthy, successful, intelligent, self-controlled man that he begins to fear any step that might shake that image, and then he is no longer living. He is maintaining his own display window. The most unpleasant thing about dependence on approval is that it makes a man predictable. And a predictable man, in this sense, is always vulnerable. He is easy to control. It is enough to hint at a threat to his reputation, and he will abandon the truth. It is enough to show that he will not be approved of, and he will retreat. It is enough to deprive him of the admiration he is used to, and he will begin to doubt his own worth. On the outside, this may look like good manners, diplomacy, maturity. But deeper down, it is simply dependence. And dependence has never been the foundation of strength. The second weakness is avoidance of discomfort. Modern people in general live as though any discomfort is a system failure. As though a difficult conversation, an unsuccessful attempt, uncertainty, loneliness, inattention are signs of a wrong life. But this is exactly where the degradation of character begins. Because everything strong in a person is born not in greenhouse conditions. Endurance is not born in comfort. Clarity is not born in endless protection from reality. Stability is not born where you always choose only what is pleasant, easy, and fast. Musashi understood this almost physically. He built not mood, but capacity. Not inspiration, but form. He did not ask himself every day whether he felt like doing what was hard. He proceeded from the fact that what is hard is the path. And here, his philosophy once again aligns in a remarkable way with Jungian logic. Jung saw personality development not as movement toward comfort, but as movement toward wholeness. And wholeness almost always requires confrontation with what you have been avoiding, with your own cowardice, with your own envy, with loneliness, with inner emptiness, with the feeling that you do not know who you are without all your external supports. A man who becomes accustomed to avoiding discomfort gradually loses contact with his depth. He begins to build his life according to the principle of least resistance. He avoids difficult conversations, delays risk, stays out of conflict when he needs to protect what matters, does not begin something if there is no guarantee, cannot endure periods of silence where there is no immediate reinforcement. Outwardly, he may seem calm, but in reality, he is simply untrained in meeting reality without anesthesia. And that is very dangerous, because sooner or later, life will bring you to a place where there will be no comfortable script. And in that moment, it will become clear that you are not ready. For a financially educated person, there is a simple image here. Discomfort is the volatility of growth. You cannot gain mature psychological capital without going through drawdowns in confidence, periods of doubt, bad decisions, emotional strain, and confrontation with the unknown. If you build your life in such a way as to exclude all unpleasant states, you exclude not only pain, you exclude scale as well. In the end, you may have a very neat life, but one that is far too small. The third weakness is slavery to desire. And this is an especially subtle thing because modern culture calls it freedom. We are told, take everything from life, follow your impulse, satisfy your desires, do not limit yourself. But a man who does not know how to keep distance between desire and action quickly ceases to be the master of his life. He becomes reactive. He lives not from principle, but from impulse. Not from choice, but from craving. Not from character, but from whatever inner wind happens to be blowing. Desires in themselves are not enemies. The problem begins when they become the center of command, when mood determines the structure of the day, when lust determines choice, when the thirst for recognition determines strategy, when boredom destroys discipline, when anxiety drives a person toward quick pleasures, when any inner discomfort immediately demands compensation with food, entertainment, empty attention, endless scrolling, unnecessary purchases, promises to yourself that tomorrow you will start over. This is a form of inner slavery. A person seems free, but in reality, he is controlled by anything stronger than his current impulse control. Jung would add another hard thought here. What is not made conscious does not disappear. It begins to command from within. If a man does not understand why he so greedily seeks pleasure, why he cannot tolerate silence, why he is afraid to be left one-on-one with himself, he will think he is simply relaxing. Though in reality, something else is often happening. He is running from an encounter with his own inner emptiness, from an encounter with the part of himself that is not filled with meaning. That is exactly why loneliness is so unbearable for many people. It is not noisy, but honest. In it, everything becomes audible that during the day was drowned out by activity, screens, conversations, stimulation. And here we come to the most important point. Why are these three weaknesses so destructive precisely together? Because they form a closed circle. A man seeks approval in order not to confront inner insecurity. He avoids discomfort in order not to feel the pain of growing up. He submits to desires in order not to feel emptiness and tension. And every time he does this, he weakens his core even more. He becomes more and more dependent on the external, less and less able to withstand the internal, farther and farther from his own strength. In midlife, this begins to be felt especially sharply. A man may have experience, money, connections, status, and yet suddenly realize that inside there is no support, that decisions are still being made out of fear, that calm depends on other people's opinion, that without stimulation and approval, what remains is anxiety. And this is one of the most dangerous moments, because here he can either harden completely, calling all of this mature realism, or for the first time honestly admit, I am not weak by nature. I have simply lived for too long at odds with my own depth. And if in these words you recognize not an abstract idea, but yourself, do one simple thing. Do not put it off. Do not overanalyze. Do not wait for the perfect mood. Write this phrase in the comments. I am taking my strength back. Not for the algorithm, not as a formality, but because the psyche changes at the moment when an inner decision takes form. When you do not just nod mentally, but speak your choice aloud. This small action seems insignificant, but it is exactly how a new inner position begins. Not the position of an observer of your life, but of a participant. And it is very possible that for someone, this short comment will become the first point at which he stops negotiating with his weakness. But acknowledgement is only the beginning. The next question is, how does a man take his strength back? Not with slogans, not with self-hypnosis, not by trying to become made of iron in a single day. The return of strength begins with the destruction of lies, with the end of beautiful explanations for one's own powerlessness. With the moment when you stop calling dependence on other people's opinions social adaptation. Stop calling cowardice caution. Stop calling indulgence freedom. This is a very painful stage because it shatters your image of yourself. But without it, there is no adult rebuilding. The second step is learning to endure loneliness without panic. Not to love it theatrically, but simply to endure it. Because loneliness is an audit of inner balance. In it, it becomes clear what you are made of. Whether you have your own thoughts, your own values, your own discipline, your own vertical axis, or whether you exist only in the reflection of other people. Musashi withdrew into solitude, not because he despised the world, but because, in silence, a person encounters himself without intermediaries. And not everyone can endure that encounter. But the one who can stops being dependent. The third step is to restore respect for discomfort, not as suffering for the sake of suffering, but as an environment for growth. A difficult conversation is not a threat, but strength training. A mistake is not a sentence, but the price of development. The unknown is not a catastrophe, but the space of maturing. Every time a man does not run from discomfort, but enters it consciously, he takes back a part of his will. He proves to himself, not to the world, but to himself, that he can endure more than he used to think. And that knowledge cannot be bought, read, or borrowed. It is built only through lived experience. The fourth step is to separate desire from command. You can want something and not submit to it. You can feel an impulse and not turn it into action. You can be angry and not destroy. You can be hungry for attention and not go after just any recognition. You can want comfort and still do what is hard. This is a simple thing in words, but it is exactly what creates character. Because character is not a set of beliefs, it is the distance between impulse and your choice. The greater that distance, the freer the man. Jung called the path toward wholeness individuation. And if you remove the academic tone, it means a very simple and severe thing. To become yourself means to stop being a collection of automatic reactions. To stop living like a psychic crowd, where today fear speaks, tomorrow vanity speaks, the day after tomorrow boredom speaks. And all the while you take this for your true self. A man's true self appears where an inner center arises that is capable of saying, I see my fear, I see my weakness, I see my desires, but they will not be the ones making decisions. That is why the path of strength is never fully comfortable. It requires giving up certain illusions. The illusion that people must always understand you. The illusion that you can become strong without entering what is difficult. The illusion that outside admiration would replace inner worth. The illusion that you can endlessly serve your desires and still remain the master of your fate. All of this has to be left behind. And it looks like a loss, only until you feel how much energy returns when you stop living in slavery to these things. Because the truth is that most male exhaustion is born not from work, but from inner disintegration. From the fact that he thinks one thing, feels another, does a third, shows a fourth. From the fact that he is dependent on other people's gaze, but pretends to be free. From the fact that he fears discomfort, but calls it reasonableness. From the fact that he submits to desires, but wants to consider himself disciplined. Such fragmentation burns a man out more than any hard labor. And on the contrary, when a man begins to gather himself into one whole, a rare sense of silence appears inside. Not because life has become easier, but because the inner civil war has ended. That is exactly when a new form of strength arrives. Not showy, not hysterical, not dependent on the need to prove something. It is a quiet, almost cold support. The ability to remain yourself under pressure. Not to trade what matters for what is convenient. Not to sell the truth for approval. Not to destroy yourself over a single impulse. Not to retreat just because things have become unpleasant. Such strength rarely looks impressive, but it is exactly what holds a destiny together. Perhaps the most important thing that can be taken from Musashi's philosophy and Jung's psychology sounds like this. A man dies not when he suffers defeat, but when he voluntarily gives power to those parts of himself that were never meant to rule. When fear decides for him. When the inner crowd is louder than the center. When desire is stronger than principle. When the need to be liked matters more than the need to be real. That is what destroys him from within. And on the contrary, a man begins returning to himself at the moment when he stops worshipping his weakness, when he finally sees it without decoration. He does not hate himself for it, does not dramatize it, does not build a cult around his trauma, but simply acknowledges, yes, this is in me. Yes, I was dependent. Yes, I ran. Yes, I submitted. But now I no longer confuse this with my true self. And then life changes, not magically, but deeply. Discipline appears without strain, honesty without posing, loneliness without panic, action without unnecessary noise, A man stops looking for himself in the external mirror and begins relying on an inner vertical axis. He is no longer ideal. He still may make mistakes, break down, doubt. But now there is someone inside who takes the steering back. And that alone is enough to begin living differently. Because a man's real strength is not in image, not in reputation, and not in the endless display of toughness. Real strength is in the ability to gather yourself into one whole and not betray that whole for the sake of fear, comfort, or momentary desire. Everything else is scenery. And when the scenery is gone, only one question remains. Who is really in control of your life? And if you answer that honestly, perhaps that very moment will mark the beginning of your true return to yourself.